I love bitter work. There's so many brilliant episodes of Avatar, but for some reason I always find myself coming back to it. Bitter work is a turning point in the journey for Avatar's characters, and I've always felt it shines in some of its best in storytelling. It's around the middle of the entire series, and it uses its throwaway training plot as a way of showing emotional change for both Aang and Zuko, two characters whose lives are already so delicately intertwined. On one hand, we have Aang's earthbending training, and on the other hand, Zuko's training has begun again, this time to learn to bend lightning. We also start to get a better understanding of how different bending can be related to or be metaphors for our feelings, personalities, reactions, how we deal with situations, in other words, who we are and why we are. Sifu Kisu, the martial arts consultant for the show, described old traditional Chinese kung fu training as, quote, bitter work, that to have sweetness, you must have bitterness. It's also not a far-off translation of kung fu itself. Kung fu being a skill achieved through hard work and practice, implying accomplishment only arrives with lots of time and energy. Aang's training proves especially difficult for him. Earthbending seems to not come anywhere near as naturally to him as learning waterbending did, his pure talent nowhere to be seen. He's a hard worker though, and is determined to follow Toph's lead. Earthbending, as Toph puts it, is a stubborn element, much like herself. What we know about earthbending is pretty surface up until this point. We've seen a lot of it in the last season and a half, but we don't know a ton about it. We know the legend of Oma and Shu and learning the skill from the badger moles, and we know that Bumi described needing to be a master of neutral jing to be an earthbending master yourself. Jing is a choice in battle, to either be on the offensive or defensive. Neutral jing being the complete balance of both, to be equally as ready to attack as to evade. To do this, you need a whole lot of decisiveness, that being a pretty key part of earthbending. Toph puts Aang in front of a giant rock rolling down a cliff toward him. He has to stop it. No hesitation or anxiety, no getting away from it or finding a trick around it. The rock is coming, and Aang has to stop it. And he can't do it. It's not a stretch to say the rock is easily like Sozin's comet, or more broadly, Aang's responsibility, the impending fight, destruction, the fear of his own fate. It's the unstoppable force that is rolling toward him. Some of Aang's lowest moments are results of him not wanting to face his own problems or consequences, the obvious example being running away when he discovered he was being sent to train, leading him to getting frozen for 100 years. More simple than that, think Aang hiding the map to Katara and Sokka's father when he was scared they'd leave him. After he burned Katara, instead of facing his fear of firebending, he decided he would just never firebend again. Even when the old man in the storm got angry at him for disappearing, he up and flew away without hesitation, avoiding the problem. Evading is not inherently a bad tactic. It's benefited airbending as an element and has been one of Aang's strongest battle strategies, and not being on the offensive can win many different kinds of fights. And instead of stopping the rock, Aang jumps away, and faces the consequences of Toph's disappointment instead. Like Katara explains, if water and fire are elemental opposites, so are air and earth. And like Aang learning earth, Zuko is learning the skill as close as he can get to the opposite of fire. Fresh off of Zuko alone and the chase, where he faces first his own self and then Azula, he's determined to learn to bend lightning in order to face her again, and Iroh agrees with him. Zuko's conflict stems from that what it takes to lightning bend is complete emotional control. As Iroh says,
lightning is a pure expression of firebending, without aggression. It is not fueled by rage or emotion the way other firebending is.
To be able to do it, you must have a sound mind, void of any feelings. Where firebending is traditionally thought of as emotion and pride and drive, instead of having to control that fire, you must guide the lightning. It's fast and deadly and decisive. Much like earthbending, lightning requires an understanding of balance and energy, to be able to interact with a force much stronger than yourself and to stand your ground respectively. Zuko's failings are pretty literal in the metaphor, as he says,
instead of lightning, it keeps exploding in my face, like everything always does.
He's in denial about his emotions, specifically his shame, and wise Uncle Iroh is quick to point out that Zuko's perception of those feelings of shame are wrong as well. Zuko at this point in his journey is heavily confused in what he believes in. He's rejected by his father in Azula and has been seeing the world from a different perspective in the Earth Kingdom. He's feeling sympathy for its people, and the pure hatred of all things Fire Nation, including Zuko himself, has been weighing on him, but instead directs this energy and anger towards his own family, and in turn himself, his great shame of who he is. When he says he's as proud as ever, he seems to think he understands his place in all of this, but we know that's not true. He's as lost as ever, stranded, banished, and with nothing to his name besides hatred and cruelty. In a lot of ways, he's right. His life has been extremely humbling to him, but that only adds to his already conflicting emotions. So instead of trying to get rid of the emotions or control them, Iroh decides to show him how to redirect them somewhere else, through redirecting lightning. Where firebending is the direct and overwhelming force, always fighting forward, the striking blows, positive jing in other words, waterbending is primarily defensive, but also the incorporation of both jings, flowing one into the other, using their opponent's strength against them. Defensive becomes offensive. Negative jing becomes positive jing. Iroh has incorporated the philosophy of waterbending into an incredibly powerful ability, redirecting another's lightning, taking the defensive and then turning it into the offensive. The elements in Avatar play beautifully as kind of windows into ourselves. I've always thought the kind of bender you might see yourself as says a lot about the kind of person you are. Iroh describes the people of the nations pretty broadly, but also accurately, and we see a character of each nation in this episode represent more or less how Iroh described them.
Fire is the element of power. The people of the Fire Nation have desire and will, and the energy and drive to achieve what they want.
Zuko's determined and unrelenting drive to learn lightning, and to achieve his goals no matter how.
Earth is the element of substance. The people of the Earth Kingdom are diverse and strong. They are persistent and enduring.
Toph is demonstrating her literal sturdiness like a rock while teaching earthbending. She is like that earth itself, unmovable to the air.
Air is the element of freedom. The air nomads detached themselves from worldly concerns and found peace and freedom. Also, they apparently had pretty good senses of humor.
Aang tries to keep his spirits up the only way he knows how, making it lighter, trying to feel free from the restraints and stubbornness of the earth, which frustrates even further when it doesn't budge.
Water is the element of change. The people of the Water Tribe are capable of adapting to many things. They have a deep sense of community and love that holds them together through anything.
Katara here I just love. She's this kind of in-between, flowing through both Aang and Toph, finding their middle ground for them and ultimately helping it not all fall apart. She creates a space to make the change easier for both of them. Later, in the episode The Guru, we get a much deeper explanation of chi and chakras, but if we use some of that philosophy given to us then, the conversations in Bitter Work mean a little bit more. We learn the fire chakra is located in the stomach. It deals with willpower, much like the element of fire, and it's blocked by shame. Iroh describes the stomach as the sea of chi, where energy in your body comes from. Pure drive and action, just like fire. Shame also being Zuko's greatest conflict right now, making the energy unable to flow through his body. He has that chakra blocked. The place you have to avoid is your heart. The element associated with the heart chakra is, surprise, surprise, air. Where fire is the embodiment of positive jing, air is the embodiment of negative jing. The heart, where your love is stored, but also your grief, but where you're the most vulnerable, and also the most free. In the case of Aang, the earth chakra deals with survival, and is blocked by fear. Much more plainly, Aang is scared. He's terrified of the unstoppable boulder, the responsibility and the destruction. He wants so badly to run away. But when he's faced with the very real situation of one of his friends in danger, he embraces his love and survival over his fear and stands his ground. Aang, on some level, has accepted this new aspect into himself. He learned that some problems you have no choice but to face, head on, and be decisive. This definitely doesn't mean he hasn't totally gotten it either. He still has a lot to learn and will keep making mistakes, but has another positive outlet for his feelings now, one much more like Toph's attitude. After this, we see Aang stand his ground. He raises his voice and makes himself heard when he thinks he needs to, and he grows. But Zuko has little patience, and for the rest of the season, he cannot settle down. Even in Ba Sing Se, Iroh tries desperately to get him to relax, that there's not always this constant threat, to a certain degree, and that his life can continue, with the ability to strike back at that moment if it should come. Zuko spends his days waiting for that moment, anticipating but also showing little effort to find the balance. He doesn't want to calm down. He wants to find that drive, that fire. Whether it's finding the Avatar or facing Azula, he needs something to redirect that hatred towards. He can't decide which is his goal. He both wants to find the Avatar, but wants to face Azula as well, both being characters that mirror himself. And when given the opportunity to feel pride over shame again, to be welcomed home, he takes it, and he hits his lowest point. Instead of redirecting his hatred, he left it inside his heart, and it's not until much later on that he even accepts that about himself. We can't overcome our shame and grief without letting it out, understanding it, talking about it. Leaving it inside will harbor just as much hardship and pain. So, Zuko sits on the top of a mountain, clinging to the unhealthy mechanisms of survival his father ingrained in him, wanting to prove himself to the world, to feel something, anything, the only way that he knows how, to strike back at it with his rage, that he can return the pain it's inflicted on him, but the world has nothing else to offer him. And once he does accept the freedom and peace of air, the endurance and strength of earth, and the love and community of water, can he start to become his whole self. Chi is not a creation of Avatar, and exists in our world's philosophies and medicines and martial arts already. Avatar, however, uses the concept of this metaphysical energy and incorporates it into not just the bending itself, as bending is the manipulation of one's chi, but also as reflections of ourselves, how we direct, process, and use our energy, feelings, and actions, right down to the internal philosophy of the four nations. But if bending is nothing more than the external manipulation of our chi, there is no real difference between, say, a firebender and a waterbender, only how they interact with the world around them. Iroh's lessons of the four nations is pretty self-explanatory. We can't live with a blind worldview. We doom ourselves to our own expectations of our actions and feelings, and without learning from others, we can't really see a different perspective or choice. To put it simply, without other people, we can't grow. Without connection and the attempt to understand each other, we'll continue to make the same mistakes, to take the same paths, sometimes the ones leading to destruction. The mechanisms that we have ingrained in ourselves to deal with our situations will repeat and repeat and repeat. But through others, we can become more than what we are. And it may be bitter work, but I think it's worth it.